Using the data in my field, it's very significant. It's my daily job here. What I do is to collect those data, analyze those data, putting them into stories, and putting them into reporting. And the reporting in return would help the campus strategic decisions, campus planning. I also report those data to outside parties, to our government, peer institutions, and we use that for benchmarking research as well.
Well, I used to work in a pharmaceutical market research firm. So they did kind of data aggregation of all of the pharmaceuticals that were either gotten at the pharmacy or through mail order, or if there were any other channels. We helped different pharmaceutical companies understand what was happening within their area. So if it was a heart medication, we could tell them the sales of all the other competitive drugs. And we also had another side in which we were tracking promotional materials to those doctors. So we were able to actually give a really complete picture to pharmaceutical companies about their competitors and what the consumers were doing who were taking their drugs.
In the research that I've been able to be involved in over the past number of years, it's primarily been working with a colleague, Dr. Mike Veach, in network queuing theory. And in those applications, we have both data from industry about the actual performance of different networks and systems. Although I've been primarily interested in computer simulations of those systems. So the data that I've directly worked with has largely been generated data as part of the simulation, but then we would be comparing that with actual data to verify that it's behaving properly. More recently, I had assisted with a math for industry class that we've offered several times now, and there we had data that in the group I worked with was working with a project from New England Biolabs, and it was genomic data, and we were looking for patterns within DNA that was extracted or was extracted through several different methods, and trying to find lower impact methods to quickly extract DNA information from samples. And so it was large amounts of data which we were scanning through, looking for particular strings and trying to line them up with other data.
I don't think my job is affected by big data because I'm a teacher, so I don't really use the big data to help my teaching. So in this sense, I don't see any impact on us. But of course, we may also we teach big data to the students. That's the only impact on us, that we need to equip the students with the skills and knowledge about big data analytic. Yeah.
So to me, with my job, with my life, data are just little bits of information. They're in its raw form. It's very messy. It's very isolated. They're everywhere. And what I do for my job is I put this data together, make sense of it, and sometimes I will weave other information around it to put them into a story. And that's the process I take to change data and change it from data into information. We selectively choose data. We selectively exclude data. And during that process, bias would come to place. So I would say when you look at some information online, when you look at charts and graphs, some of them are moving, they're very overwhelming. So when we look at this data, we have to first ask ourselves, is this graph actually providing us with what we need? And that's the cons of the increasing amount of data, because they are biased. And when you look at the chart, visually, it seems like it answers your question straight away. But deep inside, you have to look at the source where data is from. If the sample is big enough to represent the population that you want to analyze, and also what are the information that's added to it. and what are the information that's being excluded. A lot of times we'll see that because there's limitations to the data, people would select a small amount of it and to analyze it, and that's when the bias come to place as well. And there's a saying in the data field that you can beat the data all you want and make it confess to anything you want, and that's also where the bias would come to place. But there are also advantages as well. With the more data that we have on our daily lives, we have more support in terms of making decisions, study the trend, and also.
Okay, so this is issues with the attention economy, and now that we can aggregate so much information regarding people's behaviors online, and we can track a lot of information, and it can be, again, correlated in different ways too. So basically, if you watch Black Mirror, I think a lot of implications of big data are exposed. So a lot of privacy concerns are actually already happening. A lot of people's credit cards information has been breached. Another thing is thinking about how big data is, because it is such a large pool of information. Again, I don't know the fine details of this, but there are ways that it can be used to discriminate. Basically, all of these technologies, right? They are, humans are creating them, and we put in the same kind of perceptions and biases we have when we create the codes to try to understand the information. And so it's I think not enough people understand that there are a lot of implications of kind of the abilities that big data has.
Let me just, a very short story that maybe says something that's of interest. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I would have been very opposed to using an easy pass to travel on the highways. I would have been very suspicious of the cell phone applications and other things where we provide information about ourselves, about our location. And one thing that I've found for myself is that I have gradually relaxed and made myself more open in terms of the data that I'm sharing with others. I wouldn't say there's any less concern on my part, but the value that is had because of sharing that data or taking advantage of the opportunities that it provides has become more valuable to me than not sharing the data. I think concerns are really important, and I think that while a benevolent company or a benevolent government might not choose to do anything with that data, the potential for something less benevolent certainly is there. And I suppose on the one hand, what we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus is an example of how it's very easy in a really short time to go from, yeah, this is not a problem to this is a huge problem. So I guess I don't know if I'm rethinking it, but at least I'm aware of the fact that what might seem as freely releasing data about movements and other things right now might not be a problem. It's easy to imagine that it could change quickly. That's a general answer. I guess I don't have I think it's a huge concern. I think it's something that for me, if I were to start thinking about it too carefully and start becoming too concerned, I think it's just so prevalent now that we share data that it would become, I think I'd be overwhelmed by thinking about the challenge of living in this modern society without sharing data, and it would mean giving up.
So the data that we have today grows exponentially. The main reason is because nowadays it's very easy to get data from people or from machines. So we're getting more and more data. The pros, of course, you have a lot more data to analyze that help you to get inference from data set. But the cons, of course, you have to have the storage to store all this data somewhere in the cloud. But I guess today, it's because of getting data so easy. So I think the major problem is how you analyze them. And that's why big data and analytics comes in and try to solve this problem.
I think it's one piece of advice I would give the student nowadays. It's when you look at the data and look at how our data are used, I want everyone to be careful of not just giving out your information, giving out your data, but also be careful when you look at the data, how much truth is from it. Use your own judgment and use your own logic to analyze. Don't believe anything that's come up online and that you read through Wikipedia. Always do your own research. Read the small font and try to analyze and figure out the truth behind the data.
I just know there are a lot of predictive capacities of big data. So, for instance, one thing I have heard of is that fashion companies are using big data to find what styles people are really attracted to or what works for a wide swath of women. And so it's helping them kind of hone down production and meet maybe things that people are interested in. The one thing that Okay, so I'm going to go back to your question about maybe some concerns is that we just are starting to live in a very quantified society. So because of big data, we know how many likes there are. We feed off of these numbers because we like certainty, right? We like knowing that maybe 300 people saw my post, and I think it shifts our attention away from certain aspects of life that can't be quantified. So I think I am worried that we are just shifting towards a more quantifiable society where we are driven by likes and money because they are easy to measure versus our religious experience, are the ways that we value humans for being humans. So those are some of my things that I am worried about and can see happening even now.
I think an important thing to be thinking about, important thing to be talking about, is something that things have changed just so quickly. It's hard to imagine. Here we are, 4 weeks into coronavirus, social distancing sort of things, and we're all using devices like Zoom and BlueJeans and Skype and so forth to communicate. It's really hard to imagine what this experience would have been like 10 years ago had it happened and we were forced to stay apart, and only then were we beginning to have the kind of tools that we have access to now. It would have been a very different experience, and 20 years ago would have been a hugely different experience. So here's an example of how something that in fractions of our lifetimes, the world has changed in really dramatic ways, and I only believe that it's going to accelerate, so that it'd be hard to imagine what we're doing 5-10 years from now that we aren't even really thinking about as a possibility now, that will be just normal. And I think data and the ability to share, to process, to manipulate, that is going to be key to being able to do those things. Whether that makes life better for all of us is in question. It'll certainly make life better for some, but whether it works for everybody, I don't know. So the only thing I know is that 5 years from now will look a lot different than 5 years ago, and there'll be more changes perhaps than we've seen over the last 5.
I'm not familiar with the current big data project. I just searched it for a little bit. I think a lot of projects are important for us. So I just searched. One of them is the vehicle I think Microsoft partnered with Nissan and some Japanese car makers. They're trying to use a big data to help the car companies to have a better diagnosis of some of the problems with the car. So the idea is that every car has a lot of computers, so they collect all the data and send it back to the car. And because there's so many vehicles, when one vehicle has some problems, and that problem may also occur in other cars. So by collecting those data, it helps the companies to make a better car and also better maintenance. I think in this sense, it has a great impact on us because meaning that the car is more reliable. I don't know whether this is the most, yeah, this is something cool, but I'm not sure whether there are other projects that even have more impacts. I'm sure that there are, but this is one of them.